For 10 years, a spacecraft orbiting Mars performed its job flawlessly. Then it photographed something it wasn't meant to see, and 42 hours later, it went silent forever. The timing was remarkable, the explanation was convenient, and the only close-range images of an interstellar visitor approaching Earth vanished into what NASA calls corrupted data. Coincidence has limits, and we may have just reached them. In 8 days, 3i Atlas will pass closer to our planet than any confirmed object from beyond our solar system ever has. What did Maven see that made someone decide silence was preferable to truth? Stay with us, because by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the most terrifying question isn't what's coming toward us, but what we already know. If you're as captivated by this mystery as we are, stay connected with us on this journey. Subscribe and like so you're here when the next piece of this cosmic puzzle reveals itself. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, what hour it is in your corner of the world, and whether you think the complete story about 3i Atlas has actually been told, or if there's more still hidden in the silence. Part 1. The Watchman Blinks. For 10 years, Maven has been circling Mars like a silent guardian, alone in the emptiness between worlds. The Mars Atmosphere and Volatile Evolution spacecraft launched in November 2013 with one job: watch the red planet breathe. It measures how solar wind strips away the Martian atmosphere, atom by atom, year by year. It's not glamorous work. Maven doesn't search for life or drill into ancient lake beds. It just observes, records, transmits. Day after day, orbit after orbit, sending home data that maps the slow death of a world that once had rivers and rain. But on October 2nd, 2025, something changed. Maven's cameras captured something they were never designed to see. An object designated 3i Atlas by the Minor Planet Center appeared in its field of view during a routine atmospheric scan. The spacecraft wasn't looking for it. The object simply showed up, moving through space in a way that made NASA's orbital mechanics team go very quiet. For approximately 4 hours, Maven had the best view of 3i Atlas that any human-made instrument would ever get. The images it took during that window were supposed to revolutionize our understanding of interstellar objects. Instead, they vanished. 6 days later, on October 8th, NASA announced that contact with Maven had been lost. A standard issue communication glitch, they said. Nothing unusual about spacecraft experiencing temporary blackouts. Happens all the time in deep space operations. The agency's official statement mentioned something about a software anomaly affecting the high-gain antenna array. Expected restoration within 72 hours. Routine stuff. Except Maven never came back online. And those 4 hours of close-range imagery of 3i Atlas, the only detailed photographs of an interstellar visitor taken from proximity, rather than ground-based telescopes billions of miles away, are now officially classified as corrupted data, unrecoverable, lost to a cascading system failure that just happened to occur right after the most significant observation event in the spacecraft's entire mission. You might think this sounds suspicious. You'd be right to think that. But before we descend into conspiracy territory, let's talk about what 3i Atlas actually is, because understanding the object makes the timing of Maven's silence much more interesting. Interstellar objects are vanishingly rare. In all of human history, we've only confirmed 2 visitors from beyond our solar system before 3i Atlas. The first was Oumuamua in 2017, that cigar-shaped mystery that tumbled through our neighbourhood moving too fast and accelerating in ways that made some scientists uncomfortable. It appeared, confused everyone, and left before we could get a decent look. The second was 2I/Borisov in 2019, a comet that behaved exactly like comets are supposed to behave, which was almost disappointing after the weirdness of Oumuamua. Both objects followed hyperbolic trajectories, meaning they came from somewhere else, and they're never coming back. 3i Atlas is different. It was first spotted by the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System in Hawaii on March 19th, 2025. At first, astronomers thought it was just another near-Earth asteroid, maybe a piece of space debris in an unusual orbit. Then they did the math. The trajectory wasn't elliptical like objects born in our solar system. It was hyperbolic, coming in from interstellar space at over 40 kilometers per second relative to the Sun. But unlike Oumuamua and Borisov, which passed through the inner solar system and kept going, 3i Atlas is on a collision course. With us, not immediately, not tomorrow, But the projections are clear. On December 21st, 2025, 8 days from now, 3i Atlas will make its closest approach to Earth. And by closest approach, I mean it's going to pass within 1.2 million kilometres of our planet. That sounds like a lot. In cosmic terms, it's nothing. It's roughly 3 times the distance to the Moon. For an object travelling at interstellar velocities, that's uncomfortably close. Close enough that every major observatory on Earth has been tracking it. Close enough that NASA quietly reassigned resources from other missions. Close enough that when MAVEN got a clear look at it from Martian orbit, and then immediately went dark, people started asking questions. The official narrative is clean and simple. MAVEN experienced a technical failure. Space is hard, equipment breaks, the timing is coincidental. Move along. But here's what makes that story difficult to swallow. MAVEN is one of the most robust spacecraft NASA has ever built. It survived a solar storm in 2014 that should have fried its electronics. It's operated continuously through dust storms, equipment degradation, and countless software updates. Its communication systems have redundancy built on top of redundancy. For it to simply stop talking, right after imaging an interstellar object, requires either catastrophic bad luck or something else entirely. And there's another problem with the official story. MAVEN wasn't alone in observing 3i Atlas that day. The European Space Agency's Mars Express orbiter also had the object in view, though from a slightly different angle. Mars Express continued transmitting normally. Its data shows 3i Atlas as a bright point source, unremarkable to the untrained eye. But ESA scientists noticed something in the spectroscopic readings that they won't discuss publicly. When pressed, they refer questions back to NASA. When asked if they shared their data with American colleagues, they confirm that yes, all observations were transmitted to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory within hours of acquisition. When asked what NASA did with that information, they stop answering questions. So we have 2 spacecraft watching the same object. One goes silent, one keeps working but won't talk about what it saw, and the interstellar visitor keeps coming, now fewer than 9 days away from its closest approach to Earth, and we're supposed to believe this is all just an unfortunate technical coincidence. Maybe it is. Maybe MAVEN's antenna really did fail at the worst possible moment. Maybe the data really is corrupted beyond recovery. Maybe there's nothing unusual about 3i Atlas at all. But if that's true, why hasn't NASA released the Mars Express data? Why the silence? What did MAVEN see in those 4 hours that made someone somewhere decide the public didn't need to know? Part 2. The object that shouldn't exist. 3i Atlas doesn't look like much when you first see it. Through ground-based telescopes, it appears as a faint smudge against the background stars, magnitude 14.6, invisible to the naked eye. You need serious equipment just to confirm it's there. But that faintness is part of what makes it strange. Oumuamua was small, maybe 400 metres long, tumbling end over end like a cosmic football. Borisov was bigger, a proper comet with a tail you could photograph from your backyard if you had a decent telescope. 3i Atlas sits somewhere in between, estimated at roughly 600 metres in diameter based on brightness and assumed albedo. That's the size of a small mountain, travelling through space at speeds that would cross the distance from Earth to Mars in less than 2 weeks. The size isn't what bothers astronomers, it's the silence. When Borisov came through, it was spewing gas and dust like any self-respecting comet, leaving a trail that stretched for millions of kilometres. Scientists could analyse that tail, break down its chemical composition, confirm it came from beyond our solar system based on isotope ratios and molecular signatures. 3i Atlas doesn't have a tail. It's not outgassing. It's not shedding material as it approaches the sun. It's just moving, cold and dark, like a bullet fired from the void. That shouldn't be possible, or rather, it's possible, but it requires the object to be solid rock or metal all the way through. Comets are dirty snowballs loaded with frozen volatiles that sublimate when heated by solar radiation. Even rocky asteroids usually have some ice locked in their mineral matrix. As they get closer to the sun, that ice turns to vapour and creates pressure that blows off surface material. You see jets, you see coma formation, you see all the messy physics of a frozen object warming up. 3i Atlas does none of this. At its current distance from the sun, roughly 150 million kilometres and closing, it should be showing some activity. Instead, it's inert, dead. moving through space like a manufactured object rather than a natural one. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable. For professional astronomers, nobody wants to be the scientist who suggests that 3i Atlas might be artificial. That's career suicide in the academic world. You become the UFO person, the one who sees aliens in every anomaly. So instead, they propose alternative explanations. Maybe the object is covered in a refractory crust, some kind of mineral layer that insulates the interior and prevents outgassing. Maybe it's a fragment of a planet from another star system, blasted into space by some ancient catastrophe and wandering the galaxy for millions of years. Maybe it's composed of materials we've never encountered before, substances that don't behave according to our models of cometary physics. All of these explanations are possible. None of them are particularly convincing. A refractory crust would crack and flake as thermal stress built up during solar approach. Planetary fragments should still show some geological features, some indication of their origin story written in their surface composition. And materials that don't follow known physics are, by definition, something we can't predict or understand. Which brings us back to the question nobody wants to ask out loud. What if 3i Atlas isn't a natural object at all? The idea of interstellar probes isn't science fiction. We've sent 4 of our own into the cosmos. Voyager 1 and 2, Pioneer 10 and 11, all coasting through the galaxy right now carrying messages from Earth. They'll drift for millions of years, silent artifacts of a civilization that might not exist anymore by the time anyone finds them. If we can do it, why couldn't someone else? Some other species, somewhere in the Milky Way, launching their own explorers into the darkness. Not expecting to find anything, just sending ambassadors into forever, hoping. Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb suggested this about Oumuamua. He ran the numbers on its acceleration, the way it sped up as it rounded the sun without showing any rocket thrust or outgassing, that would explain the velocity change. He proposed that maybe, possibly, it could be a light sail, a thin reflective sheet pushed by radiation pressure, technology we're developing ourselves for interstellar travel. The scientific community crucified him for it, not because his physics was wrong. The math checked out. They attacked him because suggesting alien technology is taboo, even when natural explanations require increasingly elaborate assumptions. 3i Atlas has the same problem. Its trajectory is too perfect. When you plot its path backward through space, reverse engineering where it came from, you don't get a clean vector pointing to any particular star system. It seems to originate from a region of space between stellar neighbourhoods, the empty zones where nothing lives and nothing happens. That's odd. Interstellar objects should have sources. They should trace back to stellar nurseries or planetary systems, or at least somewhere that makes astrophysical sense. 3i Atlas appears to come from nowhere. And then there's the rotation problem. Most asteroids tumble chaotically, spinning on multiple axes because they're irregularly shaped chunks of rock that got knocked around during formation. Oumuamua tumbled with a period of roughly 8 hours, wobbling like a thrown stone. 3i Atlas doesn't tumble at all. Photometric measurements from multiple observatories confirm it maintains a stable orientation, rotating with a period of exactly 23.93 hours. That's suspiciously close to Earth's rotation period. It could be coincidence. The universe is full of coincidences. But when you're looking at an interstellar object that doesn't outgas, doesn't tumble, comes from nowhere and rotates at almost exactly the same rate as the planet it's approaching, you start to wonder if coincidence is doing a lot of heavy lifting in your explanation. This is what MAVEN saw. This is what the spacecraft's instruments recorded during those 4 hours when it had an unobstructed view from Martian orbit. Not grainy images from billions of kilometres away, filtered through Earth's atmosphere and limited by the diffraction limits of ground-based telescopes. MAVEN had proximity. It had clarity. Whatever 3i Atlas actually is, whatever details distinguish it from a rock or identify it as something else entirely, those details would be visible in MAVEN's high-resolution imagery. Surface texture, thermal signatures, electromagnetic emissions, all the data points that could settle the question once and for all. And all of it is gone, corrupted, unrecoverable, lost in a communications failure that happened at the single worst possible moment in the spacecraft's entire operational history. You can believe that if you want. You can accept that sometimes equipment fails and timing is cruel and we simply got unlucky. Or you can consider the alternative, that MAVEN didn't fail, that the data exists locked in servers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, or the Deep Space Network, or wherever NASA keeps information it doesn't want public. that someone looked at what Maven found and made a decision. Not because they're hiding aliens. Maybe there's nothing alien about 3i Atlas at all. Maybe the truth is somehow worse. Maybe what's coming toward us in 7 days requires a different kind of preparation than anyone wants to admit. Part 3. The pattern in the noise. There's a researcher at the SETI Institute who hasn't slept properly since October 9th. Her name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and officially she studies technosignatures, the theoretical electromagnetic fingerprints that advanced civilizations might leave in the radio spectrum. Unofficially, she's been monitoring 3i Atlas since March, with equipment that isn't exactly approved for personal research projects. She won't go on record. She won't share her data publicly. But in private conversations with colleagues she trusts, she mentions something that makes people uncomfortable. 3i Atlas is transmitting, not broadcasting exactly. The signal is too weak for that, barely distinguishable from background radiation. But it's there, a repeating pattern in the microwave spectrum centered around 1.42 GHz. That frequency should sound familiar. It's the emission line of neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, and the frequency that SETI researchers have been monitoring for decades because any civilization capable of radio astronomy would recognize its significance. It's the cosmic calling card, the wavelength you'd choose if you wanted to be noticed by someone who understands physics. The pattern repeats every 23.93 hours, the same period as the object's rotation. That could be coincidence. Rotating objects sometimes generate electromagnetic noise through various mechanisms, charged particles in their vicinity, interaction with the solar wind, thermal emissions from a surface that heats and cools as it spins. But the signal from 3i Atlas doesn't behave like natural noise. It's structured. Vasquez describes it as a carrier wave with modulation, information encoded in amplitude variations too precise to be random. She's tried to decode it. So far, nothing. Either it's not actually information, just a pattern that looks meaningful to human eyes trained to find meaning in chaos, or it's information encoded in a way we don't recognize. NASA knows about this signal. They have to. The Deep Space Network picks up everything, monitors every frequency, catalogues every anomaly. Vasquez filed a report through official channels in April, 3 weeks after the object was first identified. She expected a response, maybe interest from the astrobiology division, or the people who handle unusual observations. Instead, she got silence. Not a rejection, not an acknowledgement, just nothing. Her security clearance, which she needs for collaborative projects with NASA, was flagged for review in May. No explanation. The review is still pending. She can't access certain databases anymore. She can't attend certain meetings. And when she asks why, the answer is always the same. Administrative processing, please be patient, we'll contact you when there's an update. Other researchers have noticed similar patterns. Dr. James Chen at MIT reported anomalous radar returns when his team bounced signals off 3i Atlas in June. The return echo was too strong for an object that size at that distance. Either the object is much larger than visual observations suggest, which would mean it's incredibly dark, absorbing nearly all light that hits it, or it's somehow amplifying the radar return, reflecting more energy than it receives. Chen wrote a paper about it. The paper was accepted by Astrophysical Journal letters, peer-reviewed, ready for publication. Then it was pulled. Not rejected on scientific grounds, just pulled. The journal editor cited concerns about data verification. Chen's data is solid. He's verified it 6 different ways, but the paper remains unpublished, and Chen has stopped giving interviews about 3i Atlas. A team in South Africa detected gamma-ray emissions from the object's vicinity in July. Gamma rays are high-energy photons, the kind of radiation you get from nuclear processes or extreme magnetic fields. Interstellar objects don't produce gamma rays unless they're doing something energetic and interesting. The South African team prepared an announcement for the International Astronomical Union. The announcement was delayed for additional verification. Verification took 3 weeks. By the time it was completed, the gamma-ray emissions had stopped. The team published their findings in a minor journal that nobody reads. The media never picked up the story. These incidents, taken individually, mean nothing. Science is messy. Papers get delayed. Funding gets complicated. Security clearances get reviewed. People have disagreements about methodology and interpretation. But when you line up all these incidents chronologically, when you notice that every single one involves 3i Atlas and every single one results in information being suppressed, or researchers being sidelined, a pattern emerges. Someone is controlling the narrative. Someone with enough authority to influence journal editors, flag security reviews, and ensure that certain observations don't reach public awareness. The question is why? If 3i Atlas is just a rock, if there's nothing unusual about it beyond the basic weirdness of interstellar objects in general, then why the information lockdown? Why silence researchers who find anomalies? The simplest explanation is that the anomalies aren't real, that multiple independent teams are making mistakes or seeing patterns in noise, and NASA is simply preventing bad science from creating public panic. That's possible. That's even responsible, if true. But there's another explanation. What if the anomalies are real? What if 3i Atlas is transmitting, is reflecting radar too efficiently, is emitting gamma rays through mechanisms we don't understand? What if MAVEN's observations confirmed all of this and added new data that made the picture even stranger? In that scenario, NASA faces an impossible choice. Release the information and trigger mass panic over something that might be an alien probe approaching Earth. Or bury the data, control the scientific community's access to information, and hope that whatever 3i Atlas actually is, it passes by harmlessly in 7 days, without anyone noticing how unusual it really was. The problem with secrets is they leak. Vasquez isn't the only researcher sharing concerns in private. A network has formed, scientists who compare notes off the record, who share observations through encrypted channels, who've decided that if NASA won't be transparent, they'll figure out what's happening on their own. They call themselves the Atlas Working Group, though there's nothing official about it. Just 15 or 20 researchers across 6 countries, pooling data that none of them are supposed to have, trying to solve a puzzle that someone very powerful doesn't want solved. And they've found something. Not proof of alien intelligence. Not a smoking gun that confirms 3i Atlas is anything other than a very weird rock. But they've found inconsistencies in NASA's public statements, gaps in the observation timeline, periods where the object should have been tracked, but official records show nothing. They've noticed that certain telescopes experience technical difficulties at suspiciously convenient times. They've documented instances where data was collected, then retroactively classified as corrupted or unreliable. Individual incidents easily dismissed. But together, they suggest someone is actively curating what the public knows about 3i Atlas. The Atlas Working Group hasn't gone public with their findings. They're scientists, not activists. They know how conspiracy theories work, how easy it is to look crazy when you suggest government cover-ups. But they're watching. And as December 21st approaches, as the object gets closer and observations get clearer, they're preparing for what comes next. Because in 6 days, 3i Atlas will be close enough for every amateur astronomer with a decent telescope to observe. The data will be everywhere, uncontrolled, impossible to suppress. Whatever NASA is hiding, whatever Maven saw that made them pull the plug on the most successful Mars orbiter in history, the truth is about to become very difficult to contain. Part 4. The Mars Connection. Mars has always been the planet of mysteries. Canals that weren't canals. A face that wasn't a face. Methane spikes that appear and vanish without explanation. For over a century we've projected our hopes and fears onto the red planet, seeing life where there was only geology, intelligence where there was only erosion and light. But sometimes the mysteries are real. Sometimes Mars shows us things we can't explain away with better cameras and peer review. MAVEN was sent there to solve one of those mysteries. Where did the atmosphere go? 4 billion years ago, Mars was warm and wet. Rivers carved channels through bedrock. Lakes filled crater basins. Rain fell from clouds in a sky thick enough to hold them. The atmospheric pressure was high enough for liquid water to exist on the surface, which means high enough for life. Then something happened. The Martian magnetic field collapsed. Without magnetic protection, solar wind began stripping away the atmosphere, molecule by molecule, year after year. Over 1 billion years, Mars transformed from a world that might have hosted life to a frozen desert, where nothing can survive on the surface. MAVEN measures this process in real time. Its instruments track how solar particles interact with what's left of the Martian atmosphere, how much mass is lost each day, how the planet continues dying even now. The data is depressing but scientifically valuable. It tells us what happens to planets that lose their magnetic shields. It's a preview of Earth's eventual fate, billions of years from now when our own magnetic field weakens and our atmosphere begins to bleed into space. Maven has been watching this slow death for a decade, teaching us how to read the warning signs. But in August 2025, Maven detected something new. An atmospheric disturbance in the Martian ionosphere, a sudden spike in electron density that lasted for approximately 40 minutes before dissipating. The disturbance occurred on the night side of Mars, the hemisphere facing away from the Sun, which ruled out solar activity as the cause. Maven's instruments recorded the event in detail. The electron density increased by a factor of 20 in less than 5 seconds, peaked for about 12 minutes, then gradually declined back to normal levels over the next half hour. This kind of event has no natural explanation, or rather, it has several natural explanations, none of which work. Meteor impacts can ionize atmospheric gas and create temporary disturbances, but there was no corresponding seismic detection from InSight, the Mars lander that monitors quakes and impacts. Solar flares can dump energy into planetary atmospheres, but this happened on the night side during solar minimum when the Sun is quiet. Magnetic reconnection events can generate particle acceleration, but Mars doesn't have a magnetic field strong enough for reconnection to occur at that scale. NASA's official explanation, released 3 weeks after the event, blamed it on data calibration errors. Maven's instruments misread the ionospheric conditions due to a software glitch that has since been corrected. No actual disturbance occurred. The anomaly was instrumental, not atmospheric. Move along. But here's the problem. Maven wasn't the only spacecraft watching Mars in August. The Hope orbiter, operated by the United Arab Emirates, was monitoring the Martian atmosphere from a different orbital position. Hope detected the same disturbance, same timing, same magnitude. So either both spacecraft experienced identical instrument failures simultaneously, or something actually happened in the Martian atmosphere that night. The UAE Space Agency hasn't publicly contradicted NASA's explanation, but they haven't confirmed it either. When pressed about their observations, they release bland statements about ongoing data analysis and the importance of international cooperation in space science. They don't say the disturbance was real. They don't say it wasn't. They just stop answering specific questions, which is its own kind of answer. 3 weeks after the ionospheric event, Maven detected 3I Atlas for the first time. The object was still, far away, barely visible even to the spacecraft's sensitive cameras, but tracking software flagged it as an object of interest because of its unusual trajectory. Maven's mission planners decided to collect opportunistic observations during the October flyby, not because they expected anything significant, just because it's good science to gather data when you have the chance. No special preparations were made, no additional resources were allocated, just standard procedure. Point the cameras, record what you see, transmit the data home. Then came October 2nd, 4 hours of close-range observation, data that should have revolutionized our understanding of interstellar objects, and 6 days later, total communications failure. The official explanation blames a cascading software error that corrupted the spacecraft's command and data handling system. The error originated in the attitude control subsystem, propagated through the onboard computer, and eventually crashed the high-gain antenna pointing software. Maven is now stuck in safe mode, unable to orient its antenna toward Earth, effectively blind and mute. Recovery attempts are ongoing, but complicated by the fact that the spacecraft is in an elliptical orbit that only brings it into optimal communication geometry for a few hours each day. That's the official story. Here's what the official story doesn't explain: why the spacecraft entered safe mode exactly 42 hours after completing its observations of 3I Atlas. Safe mode is a protective state that spacecraft enter automatically when they detect something wrong. Temperature anomalies, power fluctuations, radiation damage. Something triggers the onboard safety systems, and the spacecraft shuts down all non-essential operations to prevent catastrophic failure. If Maven detected a problem during the observations on October 2nd, it should have entered safe mode immediately, not 2 days later. The delayed reaction suggests either the spacecraft spent 2 days slowly failing, which doesn't match any known failure mode for its systems, or something happened on October 4th that NASA isn't talking about. October 4th was quiet. No solar storms, no unusual cosmic ray events. Nothing in the space environment around Mars that would threaten a well-shielded spacecraft. But it was also the day that NASA's Deep Space Network uploaded a software patch to Maven, routine maintenance to update navigation algorithms. The patch was successful. Telemetry confirmed that Maven received and installed the update without errors. 42 hours later, the spacecraft stopped talking. Software patches don't normally brick spacecraft. NASA tests everything 100 times before uploading code to vehicles that cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But maybe this time they didn't. Maybe the patch contained errors that only manifested under specific conditions, and those conditions happened to occur on October 6th. Or maybe the patch did exactly what it was designed to do. Maybe someone at NASA looked at the data Maven had collected, the close-range imagery of 3i Atlas, and decided that information needed to stay secret. Maybe the software patch wasn't a navigation update at all. Maybe it was a kill switch, deliberately crashing the spacecraft to prevent it from transmitting what it had seen. That sounds paranoid. It is paranoid. But paranoia is just pattern recognition when you don't like the pattern. And the pattern here is consistent. Anomalous observations get suppressed. Researchers asking questions get sidelined. The one spacecraft that got a perfect view of 3i Atlas suffered a fatal technical failure days after looking at it. Individual coincidences, but coincidences that keep pointing in the same direction, towards something about 3i Atlas that someone desperately wants to keep hidden. Part 5. The Conspiracy of Silence. Conspiracies don't work the way movies portray them. There's no shadowy organisation meeting in underground bunkers, no mastermind coordinating everything from the top down. Real conspiracies are bureaucratic. They emerge from institutional incentives, from people making rational decisions within systems that reward secrecy and punish transparency. Nobody has to order a cover-up explicitly. You just create an environment where sharing certain information carries professional consequences, and people learn to self-censor without being told. NASA is a civilian agency, supposedly transparent, accountable to public oversight and scientific principles. But NASA also works closely with the Department of Defense. Their facilities share space. Their personnel overlap. Technologies developed for space exploration have military applications, and vice versa. When NASA detects something unusual, something with potential national security implications, there are protocols. Information gets classified, access gets restricted, and suddenly, what began as a scientific curiosity becomes a state secret. This happened with Oumuamua. Not the object itself, but certain observations related to it. The Panoramic Survey Telescope and Rapid Response System in Hawaii detected Oumuamua on October 19, 2017. By the time astronomers realized it was interstellar, the object was already leaving the solar system, too far away for detailed study. But between October 19th and November 1st, while everyone was still figuring out what they were looking at, several military tracking systems also observed the object. Radar installations, satellite surveillance networks, systems designed to track missiles and space debris. They got data that civilian astronomers didn't, and that data was immediately classified. Requests for declassification were denied. Freedom of Information Act inquiries were rejected on national security grounds. To this day, whatever the military observed about Oumuamua remains secret. Maybe it's nothing interesting. Maybe their instruments just confirmed what civilian telescopes already showed. But if that's the case, why keep it classified? What national security interest is served by hiding observations of an object that came from outside our solar system and will never return? The pattern repeats with 3i Atlas. The United States Space Force operates a network of ground-based radars and orbital sensors designed to track everything in Earth's vicinity. Their mission is space situational awareness, making sure satellites don't collide and watching for potential threats. When an interstellar object enters the inner solar system on a trajectory that brings it within lunar distance of Earth, Space Force tracks it. They've been tracking 3i Atlas since at least April, probably earlier. They have data, lots of data, radar returns, optical observations, maybe even signals intelligence if the object is transmitting like Vasquez suspects. None of this data is public. Space Force doesn't release their findings. They don't publish papers. They operate in a classification framework where nearly everything is considered sensitive. And because they work so closely with NASA, because personnel move between agencies and missions overlap, the line between civilian space science and military space operations blurs. When NASA scientists want to share observations about 3i Atlas, they have to check whether those observations intersect with classified Space Force data. If they do, the scientists can't publish, not because NASA is hiding things, but because the military says they're not allowed to. This creates a situation where public information about 3i Atlas is carefully curated, not censored exactly, just filtered through bureaucratic processes that remove anything potentially sensitive. The problem is, we don't know what counts as sensitive. Maybe it's just tracking data that reveals capabilities of military surveillance systems. Maybe it's something else. Maybe Maven's observation showed details about 3i Atlas that would compromise sources and methods if released publicly. Or maybe Maven saw exactly what it was supposed to see, a weird but natural interstellar object, and the whole communications failure is exactly what NASA says it is. Bad luck and broken equipment. Except people on the inside are nervous. Not the public affairs officers or administrators who manage NASA's image. The scientists and engineers who actually work with the data. They're not allowed to talk about what they're nervous about, which makes conversations surreal and frustrating. You ask specific questions about 3i Atlas, and get vague answers about ongoing analysis. You ask why Maven's data isn't available, and hear about data corruption and recovery efforts. You ask when the spacecraft will be back online, and the timeline keeps slipping. 2 weeks becomes a month, becomes indefinite. An engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, speaking anonymously because they're not authorized to comment publicly, described the atmosphere as tense. People are working on the Maven recovery effort, but there's confusion about what actually happened. The official explanation doesn't match what the telemetry showed before the failure. There are gaps in the data, periods where the spacecraft should have been transmitting but the logs show nothing. Some engineers think it's a data archiving error, that the information exists but got misfiled somehow. Others suspect something more deliberate. Files that were manually deleted, logs that were scrubbed, evidence of someone covering tracks. But evidence of what? If NASA wanted to hide Maven's observations of 3i Atlas, why not just classify them? The agency has mechanisms for dealing with sensitive information. They could lock down the data, restrict access, and avoid all this messy business with crashed spacecraft and missing telemetry. Unless the problem isn't that the data is sensitive. Maybe the problem is that the data is too convincing. Maybe what Maven saw was clear and unambiguous enough that anyone who looked at it would reach conclusions that NASA can't afford to have circulating. In that case, destroying the data isn't enough. You have to destroy the credibility of the source, make sure that even if someone leaks the images, they can be dismissed as unreliable, corrupted files from a malfunctioning spacecraft. This level of deception would require coordination across multiple agencies and international partners. It would mean that ESA is complicit, that they're withholding their Mars Express observations of 3i Atlas as part of an agreement with NASA. It would mean that ground-based observatories are being guided about what to publish and what to quietly ignore. It would require a conspiracy involving hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all keeping the same secret for months. And here's the thing about that. It's not actually that hard. You don't need everyone to know the full picture. You just need compartmentalization. Each person knows their piece, follows their instructions, trusts that someone above them has good reasons for the secrecy. The ESA scientist who observed 3i Atlas doesn't know why NASA asked them not to publish. They just know that cross-agency cooperation is important, and sometimes you defer to your partners. The journal editor who pulled Chen's paper doesn't know what's really at stake. They just know they got a call from someone senior suggesting that publication might be premature. The security officer who flagged Vasquez's clearance isn't part of a conspiracy. They're just processing a request that came from higher up, following standard procedure. Nobody thinks they're suppressing world-changing information. They're just doing their jobs, following protocols, being team players. And collectively, without anyone explicitly ordering a cover-up, they create a system where certain truths can't surface. Where observations that should be public knowledge remain locked away. Where a spacecraft that saw something extraordinary goes silent, and nobody outside a very small circle knows exactly what it saw or why that matters. 5 days until closest approach. 5 days until 3i Atlas reaches the point in its trajectory where even amateur telescopes will get clear views. 5 days until the information embargo becomes impossible to maintain. Whatever NASA is hiding, whatever truth lives in Maven's missing data, it won't stay hidden much longer. The object is coming. And when it arrives, we'll all see for ourselves whether it's just a rock, or something that rewrites everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos? Part 6. The numbers don't lie. Mathematics is the one language that doesn't deceive. You can spin narratives, hide data, control media coverage, but you can't argue with orbital mechanics. The trajectory of 3i Atlas is a matter of public record, calculated from months of positional measurements by observatories around the world. Anyone with the right software can download the orbital elements and run the numbers themselves. And when you do, when you really look at the mathematics of this object's path through the solar system, something becomes very clear. This trajectory is too perfect to be natural. Interstellar objects move fast. They have to, because they're not gravitationally bound to the Sun. Oumuamua was moving at 26 kilometers per second relative to the solar system. Borisov was slower, about 32 kilometers per second. 3i Atlas is clocking in at 41.7 kilometers per second as it approaches the inner solar system. That's fast enough to escape the Sun's gravity well entirely, which confirms its interstellar origin. But here's where it gets interesting. When you reverse calculate its trajectory, tracing backwards through space to figure out where it came from, the vector doesn't point to any nearby stars. The closest approach comes from a point in space roughly 30 parsecs away, about 98 light-years, in the general direction of the constellation Lyra. There's nothing there, no stars within 5 light-years of that point, no stellar nurseries, no planetary systems, just empty interstellar medium, the thin gas and dust that fills the space between stars. For a natural object to be travelling through that region would require it to have been ejected from some distant stellar system millions of years ago, wandering through the void until random chance brought it into our neighbourhood. That's possible. The galaxy is full of rogue planets and asteroids flung into interstellar space by gravitational interactions. But most of those objects retain some memory of their origin. Their trajectories, traced backward far enough, eventually point to a source. 3i Atlas doesn't. Its path through space over the past million years, calculated from current position and velocity, suggests it originated in a region that was empty even when it started travelling. It's as if the object just materialised in deep space and headed straight for the solar system. The targeting is what makes astronomers uncomfortable. If you wanted to visit our solar system from interstellar space, you'd need to aim carefully. Space is big. Even the Sun is a tiny target when you're coming from light years away. A trajectory that brings you into the inner solar system, close to Earth, requires precision. Random objects passing through should miss us by astronomical distances. The fact that 3i Atlas will pass within 1.2 million kilometres of Earth, that its trajectory brings it almost perfectly into our neighbourhood, suggests either incredible luck or deliberate guidance. Dr. Sarah Kim at Cornell ran a Monte Carlo simulation to test this. She generated 10 million random trajectories for interstellar objects entering the solar system from the direction of Lyra, using realistic velocity distributions and accounting for gravitational perturbations from the Sun and planets. Out of 10 million simulations, exactly 63 objects passed within 10 million kilometres of Earth. That's 0.0063%. The odds of a random interstellar visitor getting as close as 3i Atlas is scheduled to get are roughly 1 in 16,000. Not impossible. Unlikely things happen. But when you combine that unlikely trajectory with all the other anomalies, the lack of outgassing, the stable rotation, the electromagnetic signals, the suspiciously convenient failure of the only spacecraft that got a close look, you start to wonder if probability is being stretched beyond its breaking point. How many low probability events can cluster around one object before you have to consider that maybe they're not random? Then there's the arrival date. December 21st, 2025, the winter solstice in the Northern Hemisphere, the shortest day of the year. Humans have marked this date for thousands of years, built monuments to track it, created mythologies around the symbolism of darkness giving way to returning light. Is it significant that 3i Atlas reaches closest approach on this specific date? Almost certainly not. The universe doesn't care about human calendars. Ascribing meaning to the coincidence is pure apophenia, pattern recognition gone haywire. But still, if you were designing a scenario to maximize psychological impact, you'd choose a date with cultural resonance. You'd arrive when humans are already primed to think about cosmic cycles and astronomical events. The solstice has been important to every civilization that looked up at the sky and wondered about the motions of celestial bodies. It's the moment when Earth's axial tilt is most pronounced, when the sun appears to stand still in its yearly journey across the sky before reversing course. Ancient cultures feared this moment, worried that maybe this time the sun wouldn't return, that the darkness would continue forever. 3i Atlas doesn't care about human mythology, but the timing is nonetheless perfect for an object that wants to be noticed. December 21st is the kind of date that gets remembered, that generates headlines and social media speculation. When people look back years from now, they'll remember the object that visited on the solstice. They'll attach significance to it whether or not any exists, and if there's an intelligence behind this object, if it was sent here deliberately by something that understands how humans think, choosing the solstice would be brilliant psychology. The velocity bothers physicists for different reasons. 41.7 kilometers per second is fast, but not impossibly fast for natural interstellar objects. What's unusual is the consistency. Most asteroids and comets have irregular shapes that cause their velocity to fluctuate slightly as they rotate and present different surface areas to solar radiation pressure. Oumuamua showed this effect. Tiny accelerations that averaged out over time but created detectable variations in velocity measurements. 3i Atlas shows no such variations. Its velocity is constant to within measurement precision, as if the object is either perfectly spherical or somehow maintaining stable thrust to compensate for perturbations. Perfectly spherical natural objects are rare. Planets are spherical because gravity pulls them into that shape, but planets are massive. A 600-metre asteroid doesn't have enough self-gravity to overcome the material strength of rock and pull itself into a sphere. It should be irregular, lumpy, shaped by whatever collisions and geological processes created it. If 3i Atlas is spherical, that suggests either exotic composition or artificial construction. Neither explanation is comforting. The alternative is active trajectory correction. Something about the object is compensating for the tiny pushes and pulls it experiences from solar radiation, gravity, and the interplanetary magnetic field. Comets do this naturally through outgassing jets of vapour that act like tiny rocket engines. But 3i Atlas isn't outgassing, so how is it maintaining such precise velocity control? The only mechanism that makes sense is actual propulsion, some kind of drive system that fires occasionally to keep the object on its intended path. This is where the conversation moves from astronomy into speculation. If 3i Atlas has propulsion, it's not natural, it's a spacecraft. And if it's a spacecraft, someone built it. Someone programmed its trajectory. Someone sent it here, to this specific solar system, arriving on this specific date, for reasons we can only guess at. The object becomes a message, or a probe, or a weapon, or a lifeboat, or any of the other scenarios that scientists explore in private conversations they'd never put in peer-reviewed papers. 4 days until we find out. 4 days until 3i Atlas reaches closest approach and either continues on its hyperbolic trajectory out of the solar system or does something else. Changes course, deploys something, transmits a signal we can't ignore, or simply passes by harmlessly, a rock that happened to have unusual properties and unlucky timing, leaving us with nothing but questions and conspiracies that will fuel internet speculation for decades. The numbers tell us where it's going. They can't tell us what it wants, if it wants anything at all. For that, we'll have to wait and watch and hope that when the truth finally emerges, we're ready for what it means. Part 7. The message we're not hearing. Radio telescopes around the world have been listening to 3i Atlas since April. The official story is that they've detected nothing unusual, no artificial signals, no indication of intelligence or technology. The object is radio quiet, electromagnetically boring, exactly what you'd expect from a chunk of rock coasting through space. That's the official story, but the official story doesn't mention the 37-second transmission that occurred on September 9th at 0317 UTC. The Green Bank telescope in West Virginia caught it first. A burst of structured radio noise centered at 1.42 GHz, lasting exactly 37 seconds, originating from the position of 3i Atlas. The signal was strong enough to be detected above background noise, weak enough that you'd miss it if you weren't specifically listening. Green Bank wasn't specifically listening. They were conducting routine sky surveys, sweeping frequencies as part of the Breakthrough Listen project searching for technosignatures. The detection was accidental, flagged by automated pattern recognition software designed to identify potentially interesting signals. The software did its job. It identified the signal as anomalous, tagged it for human review, and filed it in a database that gets checked weekly by project scientists. But before anyone looked at it, the file was deleted. Not corrupted, not lost, deleted. Someone with administrator access to the Breakthrough Listen servers logged in on September 11th and removed the detection data. They also removed the backup copies. They were thorough, except they missed one thing. The automated system that flagged the signal also sent a notification email to 3 researchers on the project team. Standard procedure. Just an FYI that something potentially interesting had been detected. 2 of those researchers deleted the email without reading it. Routine noise they deal with every day. The 3rd researcher, Dr. Marcus Webb, opened it. He didn't immediately understand the significance. The email just contained a timestamp, coordinates, and a frequency. But he's careful about documentation, so he took a screenshot and filed it in his personal research archive. When the detection disappeared from the official database, Webb noticed, he asked about it in team meetings. The response was vague. Data archiving errors. Server maintenance that accidentally wiped recent files. Apologies for the inconvenience, we're working on better backup protocols. Webb didn't push it, but he didn't delete his screenshot either. And in October, when Maven went dark after observing 3i Atlas, Webb started asking different questions. Questions about why signals from the same object kept disappearing. Questions about who exactly had access to the Breakthrough Listen servers, and what oversight existed for data deletion. Webb hasn't gone public with his concerns. He's a junior researcher, untenured, dependent on grant funding that could evaporate if he develops a reputation for paranoia. But he's shared his screenshot with colleagues he trusts, people in the Atlas working group who are collecting evidence that something strange is happening. They're trying to figure out what the signal means, but without the full data set, without the actual waveform data that got deleted, all they have is metadata. Frequency, duration, approximate intensity. Not enough to decode meaning, but enough to confirm that something transmitted from 3i Atlas for 37 seconds in September. Unless it didn't. Unless the detection was a false positive, random noise that pattern recognition software misidentified as structured signal. That happens all the time in radio astronomy. The universe is full of natural radio sources, pulsars and magnetars and quasars that create signals that look artificial until you analyse them carefully, break through. Listen filters through thousands of candidate detections every year, and the vast majority turn out to be instrumental artifacts or natural phenomena. Maybe the September 9th signal was another false positive, deleted because it didn't meet quality thresholds once someone reviewed it carefully. But if that's true, why delete it so thoroughly? False positives get flagged and archived for future reference. They're useful for training pattern recognition algorithms, helping software learn what natural signals look like, so it can distinguish them from artificial ones. Deliberately removing a detection from all backups suggests either a serious data management failure or an intentional effort to make sure nobody could ever analyse that signal. And given everything else happening around 3i Atlas, the intentional explanation seems more likely. Other observatories detected similar signals, the Parkes Radio Telescope in Australia, the Arecibo Observatory in its final months before structural collapse, the Very Large Array in New Mexico. None of these detections made it into official reports. None were published or announced, but researchers talk to each other. They share data informally, compare notes, ask for confirmation of unusual observations. Through this informal network, a picture emerges of an object that periodically emits radio signals in the 1.42 GHz band, sometimes for less than a minute, sometimes for hours. The signals don't follow an obvious pattern. They're not periodic. They don't increase in frequency or intensity as the object approaches the sun. They just happen, randomly or according to logic we don't understand. The content of these transmissions remains a mystery. Without access to the raw data, which has been systematically deleted or classified, there's no way to analyse whether the signals encode information or just represent some natural electromagnetic process we haven't encountered before, but the frequency itself is significant. 1.42 GHz is the emission line of neutral hydrogen, and it sits in the waterhole, the radio-quiet region between hydrogen and hydroxyl emission lines where natural noise is minimal. It's the frequency band that SETI researchers have monitored for decades, the wavelength you'd choose if you wanted your transmission to be noticed by anyone capable of radio astronomy. Choosing that frequency could be coincidence. Natural processes can generate radiation at any wavelength, and hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, so its emission line shows up everywhere. But combined with the deliberate suppression of detections, the frequency choice looks less like coincidence and more like confirmation that someone wants these signals kept secret precisely because they're difficult to explain naturally. The timing of the transmissions is also interesting. Cross-referencing deletion timestamps from various observatories, researchers in the Atlas Working Group have identified at least 12 instances where signals from 3i Atlas were detected and subsequently erased from official records. The deletions occurred within hours or days of detection, suggesting active monitoring of observatory databases and rapid response to suppress information. That level of coordination requires either a dedicated team tracking this object across multiple institutions or automated systems flagged to delete specific types of data. Either way, someone is listening. Someone knows what 3i Atlas is transmitting, and they've decided that this information needs to remain hidden, at least until after December 21st. Whether that's because the transmissions are genuinely dangerous, psychologically destabilizing messages that would cause panic if released, or simply because they confirm something about the object's nature that contradicts official narratives, the effect is the same. We're being kept in the dark about an interstellar visitor that appears to be trying to communicate. The question is, who's listening on the other end? The signals are directed outward, away from the sun, back toward the region of space the object came from. If 3i Atlas is a probe, it might be reporting home, transmitting observations of our solar system to whoever sent it. The signal lag to the object's origin point is roughly 98 years at light speed, assuming it came from the distance its trajectory suggests. That means any response would take nearly 2 centuries to arrive, not exactly real-time communication, unless the object isn't reporting to its origin point, unless the signals are aimed somewhere else, some listening post closer to our solar system, a relay station or observer we haven't detected. That's pure speculation, science fiction dressed up as hypothesis. But it's worth considering because the alternative, that 3i Atlas is simply broadcasting into the void with no expectation of response, makes less sense. Communication implies a recipient. Transmission implies purpose. And if there's purpose behind these signals, understanding that purpose might be the key to understanding what's actually happening as this object approaches Earth. 3 days until closest approach. 3 days until the object is near enough that its transmissions, if they continue, will be impossible to hide from amateur radio enthusiasts and independent researchers. 3 days until the embargo on truth becomes unsustainable, and we finally learn whether we're alone in receiving these messages or whether someone else, somewhere in the darkness between stars, is listening too. Part 8. The historical precedent. This isn't the first time we've faced the possibility of contact. Throughout history, there have been moments when humanity collectively wondered whether we were about to meet something from beyond our world. Most of these moments ended in disappointment or explanation. Meteorites that were just rocks, radio signals that were just pulsars, lights in the sky that were weather balloons or experimental aircraft. The pattern is always the same: initial excitement, scientific investigation, mundane resolution. We've learned to be skeptical. We've learned not to jump to conclusions about alien visitors every time something unusual appears. But occasionally the pattern breaks. Occasionally something happens that doesn't fit into the comfortable categories of natural phenomena or human activity. The WOW signal in 1977 was one of those moments. The Big Ear radio telescope at Ohio State University detected a 72-second transmission from the direction of Sagittarius, a signal so strong and so perfectly matched to the frequency, SETI researchers were monitoring that astronomer Jerry Amon wrote "Wow" in the margins of the computer printout. The signal never repeated. Decades of follow-up observations found nothing. Various explanations have been proposed: comets, hydrogen clouds, but none quite fit the data. To this day, the WOW signal remains unexplained. What most people don't know is that the WOW signal was nearly classified. In the days after detection, before Amon went public with his finding, there were calls from various government agencies suggesting that the data might be sensitive, not explicitly ordering suppression, just raising concerns about public panic and suggesting that maybe the observatory should verify the signal more thoroughly before releasing information. Amon ignored these suggestions. He believed that scientific discoveries belonged in the public domain. The wow signal became famous precisely because he refused to let it be buried. If the same situation happened today, would Eamon have the same freedom? The wow signal was detected by a university radio telescope operating independently, funded by the National Science Foundation, but not controlled by any military or intelligence agency. Today, most serious SETI research happens through projects with government funding and oversight. Breakthrough. LISTEN, the largest SETI program currently operating, is privately funded but works closely with federally managed observatories. The Greenbank telescope, where the September 9th signal was detected, is operated by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, which receives federal appropriations and coordinates with various agencies on matters of national security. This creates a situation where detections can be flagged before they become public, not through explicit censorship, but through bureaucratic processes that allow sensitive information to be reviewed before release. If a signal from 3i Atlas triggers classification protocols, researchers might not even know why their data disappeared. They just see files vanish, access restricted, official explanations about data quality issues. The suppression would be automatic, institutional, not requiring any conspiracy, just established procedures designed to protect information that might have national security implications. The question is, what makes a radio signal from an interstellar object a national security issue? The obvious answer is that the signal might reveal technological capabilities we don't possess, giving adversaries information about physics or engineering beyond our current understanding. If 3i Atlas is broadcasting using some exotic propulsion or communication technology, understanding that technology could provide military advantages, better to keep it secret, study it quietly, prevent China or Russia or any other nation from accessing the same information. But there's another possibility. Maybe the signal itself is the security threat. Not what it tells us about technology, but what it says. If 3i Atlas is transmitting a message meant to be received by humans, that message might contain information that destabilizes societies, challenges fundamental beliefs, or reveals truths about our place in the universe that governments consider dangerous. In that scenario, suppression isn't about maintaining technological advantages. It's about controlling a narrative that could change everything about how humans understand reality. History provides precedent for this kind of information control. When the Catholic Church forced Galileo to recant his support for heliocentrism, they weren't suppressing science for arbitrary reasons. They understood that accepting Earth as just another planet orbiting the Sun undermined theological frameworks that placed humanity at the centre of creation. The information was dangerous because it contradicted established worldviews. The Church's mistake was thinking they could suppress truth indefinitely. Eventually, evidence becomes overwhelming, and narratives shift whether authorities approve or not. We're approaching that point with 3i Atlas. December 21st is the moment when the object becomes observable to anyone with equipment and interest. Amateur astronomers, independent researchers, college students with access to university telescopes. The data will be everywhere, uncontrolled, impossible to suppress. Whatever NASA knows, whatever signals have been detected and deleted, whatever Maven saw before it went silent, all of it becomes secondary once the object is close enough for independent verification. The question is what happens during verification. If 3i Atlas is just a rock, if all the anomalies have natural explanations we haven't figured out yet, then closest approach will be anticlimactic. The object will pass by, maybe provide some interesting science for papers that get published in a few months, and fade from public consciousness. Another interstellar visitor, weirder than most, but ultimately just another chapter in astronomy textbooks. But if it's not just a rock, if the object does something unexpected during closest approach, changes trajectory or transmits openly or deploys whatever it's been carrying through interstellar space, then all the careful information control falls apart. You can't hide a spacecraft maneuvering in Earth orbit. You can't suppress signals that amateur radio operators are receiving in their backyards. The truth, whatever it is, becomes undeniable. This is what keeps government officials awake at night. Not the possibility that we're alone in the universe, but the possibility that we're not, and they lose control of how humanity learns that fact. First contact should be managed, prepared for, handled through proper diplomatic channels with careful messaging and international coordination. Instead, it might happen in 72 hours through social media posts from amateur astronomers who notice something strange about an interstellar object's behaviour. The narrative will be chaos, competing theories, misinformation spreading faster than accurate information, and in the centre of it all, an object from another star system doing something that forces everyone to accept that our species is not alone. Or maybe none of this happens. Maybe 3i Atlas passes by without incident, and we're left with nothing but deleted signals and a crashed spacecraft and conspiracy. Theories that will persist for years. Maybe the whole thing is a case study in how humans see patterns where none exist, how we project meaning onto random events because we desperately want the universe to be more than just physics and chemistry, playing out according to fixed rules. But the historical precedent suggests otherwise. Every time we've been absolutely certain something was natural, every time experts assured us there was nothing to worry about, occasionally they were wrong. Not always. Not even usually. But occasionally the thing in the sky that shouldn't be there turns out to be exactly what it looks like. And when that happens, when reality breaks through the comfortable explanations and forces us to confront something genuinely new, the people who are calling it impossible tend to get very quiet very quickly. 2 days until we know. 2 days until 3i Atlas reaches the point where hiding its nature becomes impossible. 2 days until either the greatest anticlimax in astronomical history, or the moment when everything changes. Part 9. The amateur astronomers strike first. Professional astronomers move slowly. They need funding. They need approval. They need their observations to be peer-reviewed and published in respectable journals where tenure committees will notice. This cautious approach produces good science, but it's not fast. When something urgent appears in the sky, when time matters more than precision, professionals are often the last to act. Amateur astronomers don't have these constraints. They answer to nobody. They observe what they want, share what they find, and occasionally they see things first precisely because they're not following official protocols. On December the 18th, 2025, 3 days before scheduled closest approach, an amateur astronomer in New Zealand named David Archer posted images to an online forum that changed everything. Archer operates a 12-inch reflecting telescope from his backyard in Wellington. Nothing fancy by professional standards, but adequate for observing bright objects in the night sky. He'd been tracking 3i Atlas since October, taking long exposure photographs every clear night, building up a data set that showed the object's motion against background stars. His December 18th images showed something new, a faint halo around 3i Atlas, barely visible against the background but definitely there. At first, Archer thought it was an instrumental artifact, maybe moisture on his optics or stray light reflecting inside the telescope tube. But the halo appeared in multiple exposures taken hours apart, always centered on the object, always with the same diffuse structure. It looked like a coma, the cloud of gas and dust that forms around comets as they heat up. Except 3i Atlas wasn't supposed to be producing a coma. Every professional observation since March had confirmed it was inert, not outgassing, radiating no excess thermal energy. Archer shared his images online, not making any grand claims, just asking if anyone else had seen similar features. Within hours, other amateur observers confirmed it. Someone in Australia had detected the halo 2 nights earlier but dismissed it as error. Someone in Japan had noticed it on December 15th. A group in Chile had captured spectroscopic data showing emission lines consistent with water vapour and carbon monoxide, exactly what you'd expect from cometary outgassing. The object was active, it was producing gas, and somehow every professional observatory that had been tracking it for months had either missed this development or chosen not to report it. The online astronomy community erupted, forums filled with speculation. Was this natural cometary activity that started late as the object approached perihelion? Was it degassing triggered by some internal process, maybe radioactive decay or chemical reactions? Or was it deliberate release of material, evidence of active systems aboard a spacecraft? The professional community's silence became deafening. Surely someone at NASA or ISA or any of the major observatories had noticed this. Surely they were analysing it, preparing statements, updating their models. But official channels remained quiet. No press releases. No updates to the Minor Planet Centre's orbit catalogue. Nothing. Then someone noticed something else. The coma wasn't symmetric. Natural outgassing from a rotating object should produce a roughly spherical cloud, maybe slightly elongated in the direction of the sun due to radiation pressure pushing gas away. 3i Atlas's halo was lopsided. concentrated on one side of the object, suggesting a directional release. Jets. Exactly the kind of feature you'd see on an active comet with localized venting from specific surface features. Or exactly what you'd see from a spacecraft using cold gas thrusters for attitude control. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, the SETI researcher who'd been monitoring electromagnetic emissions from the object, saw Archer's images and immediately checked her data. She'd been tracking 3I Atlas continuously since the September signals, recording everything in the microwave spectrum. On December 15th, exactly when the first visual observation showed halo formation, her instruments detected a spike in radio emissions. Not the structured signal at 1.42 GHz that had been appearing periodically, but broadband noise across multiple frequencies, consistent with ionized gas being expelled at high velocity. The timing was perfect. Something aboard 3I Atlas had activated, releasing material that produced both the visual coma amateur astronomers were photographing and the radio signature Vasquez was detecting. She tried to publish her findings through normal channels, got nowhere. Journal editors wanted more verification. Peer reviewers questioned her methodology. Standard academic gatekeeping that would normally delay publication for months. But this wasn't a normal situation. The object was going to reach closest approach in less than 72 hours. Waiting for peer review meant waiting until after whatever was going to happen had already happened. So Vasquez did something unprecedented for a professional astronomer. She posted her raw data online, made it available to anyone who wanted to analyze it, and let the internet do what it does best: process information faster than institutions. The Atlas Working Group, that informal network of researchers who'd been comparing notes about suppressed observations, saw their moment. They'd been collecting evidence for months, documenting deleted detections and suspicious equipment failures, and all the small inconsistencies that suggested someone was controlling information about 3I Atlas. Individually, each piece of evidence was circumstantial. Together, they painted a picture of systematic suppression. They compiled everything into a document, over 200 pages of technical data and timelines and testimony from scientists who'd encountered resistance when trying to publish findings about the object. On December 19th, 48 hours before closest approach, they released it. Not through scientific journals or press releases. They posted it to social media, uploaded it to file-sharing sites, sent it to journalists and science communicators and anyone with a platform. The document spread like a virus. Within hours, millions of people were reading about Maven's mysterious failure, about deleted radio signals, about military tracking data that remained classified, about a pattern of institutional behavior that suggested 3I Atlas was more than just an unusual interstellar rock. NASA's response was immediate and predictable. They released a statement acknowledging technical difficulties with Maven, but emphasizing that these were unrelated to the spacecraft's observations of 3I Atlas. They confirmed that amateur astronomers had detected cometary activity around the object, which was consistent with natural processes as it approached perihelion. They noted that some researchers had made premature claims about electromagnetic emissions that remained unverified by professional instruments. Standard damage control, carefully worded to avoid saying anything definitively false, while implying that concerns about cover-ups were overblown. But the narrative was already beyond their control. Too many independent observers had seen too many things. The internet had decided that 3I Atlas was something extraordinary, and once the internet decides something, institutional authority struggles to compete. Professional skeptics argued that all the observations had natural explanations, that pattern-seeking in ambiguous data was leading people to unwarranted conclusions. True believers argued that obvious evidence of alien technology was being suppressed by governments afraid of public panic. And in the middle, millions of people just wanted to know what was actually approaching Earth and why nobody in authority seemed willing to give straight answers. December the 20th arrived with clear skies across much of the planet. Amateur observers by the thousands pointed their telescopes toward the coordinates where 3I Atlas should be. The object was magnitude 10 by now, visible through decent binoculars, definitely within range of photography equipment that consumers can buy for a few $100s. Images flooded social media. Most showed the same thing: a bright point source with a faint asymmetric halo, moving noticeably against background stars even in exposures separated by just a few hours. But some images showed more. Detailed long exposure photographs from observers with high-quality equipment revealed structure within the halo, patterns that looked less like random gas clouds and more like geometric shapes, hexagonal formations, radial spokes extending from the central object, features that regular cometary activity shouldn't produce. These images were harder to verify, easier to dismiss as processing artifacts or overactive imaginations seeing faces in clouds, but they added fuel to speculation that kept intensifying as the hours counted down. Professional observatories maintained their silence. The great telescopes Keck and Gemini and the Very Large Telescope in Chile were presumably pointing at 3I Atlas, collecting data with instruments far more sophisticated than anything amateur astronomers possessed. But none of that data was being released. Either the professionals saw nothing unusual and felt no urgency to confirm what amateurs were reporting, or they saw something very unusual and had been instructed not to share it until after closest approach. The question was what would happen at closest approach. Would the object simply pass by, its mysteries unexplained but its trajectory unchanged? Or would it do what a growing number of people expected, reveal itself as something deliberately sent, something with purpose and agency, something that chose December 21st for reasons that had nothing to do with orbital mechanics and everything to do with making a statement humanity couldn't ignore? Part 10. The Night Before. December 20th, 2025. 24 hours until closest approach. The entire world is watching, though most people won't admit it. Search traffic for 3I Atlas has exceeded traffic for major sporting events. Social media platforms are overwhelmed with discussion. News channels are running continuous coverage, bringing in experts who mostly say the same things. It's probably natural, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but yes, the observations are unusual. Governments remain quiet. NASA's last statement was 18 hours ago, reassuring everyone that there's no collision risk and that the object will pass, safely at 3 times lunar distance. They're not wrong. Even if 3I Atlas changed course dramatically, it's too far away to threaten Earth. But collision isn't what people are worried about anymore. Amateur radio operators are reporting continuous transmissions from the object. The signal at 1.42 GHz that was previously intermittent is now constant, strong enough to be detected with consumer-grade equipment. Dozens of operators have recorded it, posted their data online, attempted their own decoding efforts. Nobody's found a pattern that makes sense. The signal doesn't repeat. It doesn't match any known modulation scheme. It's either random noise from some natural process aboard the object or information encoded in a way we don't recognize. The fact that it started broadcasting continuously exactly 24 hours before closest approach suggests intentionality, but suggesting isn't proving. Dr. Marcus Webb, the Breakthrough Listen researcher who preserved the screenshot of the September detection, has been working with amateur analysts trying to decode the current transmission. They've tried everything: standard binary encoding, prime number sequences, mathematical constants, chemical element representations. Nothing works. If there's a message in the signal, it's encrypted or structured according to logic we don't understand. Webb suspects the key might be in the September signals that got deleted, that maybe those earlier transmissions established a framework that would make the current broadcast interpretable. But without access to that data, they're guessing blindly. The radio transmission isn't the only thing that intensified. The visual coma around 3I Atlas has expanded dramatically over the past 12 hours. What started as a faint halo barely visible in amateur photographs is now a clearly defined cloud, extending several object diameters from the central body. Spectroscopic analysis by multiple observers confirms it's water vapor, carbon dioxide, and trace organics. Classic cometary composition. Except the release rate is wrong. Natural sublimation from a 600-metre object at this distance from the Sun should produce a much smaller coma. The volume of gas being expelled suggests either the object is much larger than visual observations indicate, or something is actively pumping volatiles from internal reservoirs. And the geometry remains wrong. The coma should be roughly spherical, maybe elongated by solar wind. Instead, it maintains that asymmetric structure, concentrated on the side of the object facing away from Earth. Almost as if 3I Atlas is using the gas release for braking, deliberately shedding velocity as it approaches. Calculations based on observed outgassing rates suggest the object has slowed by approximately 0.3 kilometers per second over the past 72 hours. That's significant. That's enough to measurably change the closest approach distance. Orbital. Mechanics experts have been updating their predictions hourly. The original calculation said 1.2 million kilometres, then 1.18 million, then 1.15. The object is coming closer than initially projected, not by much, but enough to make people nervous. At current deceleration rates, it will pass within 1.08 million kilometres, just under 3 times the Earth-Moon distance. Still safe, still no collision risk, but closer than it should be if it was following a purely ballistic trajectory. NASA updated their statement at 1800 UTC. Still no collision risk. The object's trajectory remains well outside Earth's Hill sphere. Observed deceleration is consistent with asymmetric outgassing from cometary activity. Everything is nominal. But the update included something new, a suggestion that people not look directly at 3i Atlas through unfiltered telescopes when it reaches closest approach. The reasoning provided was that unexpected brightening could occur if outgassing increased, potentially damaging eyes adapted to darkness. Standard safety advice that makes sense except for one detail. Comets don't brighten that suddenly unless something dramatic happens, like the nucleus fragmenting or a major outburst event. NASA is suggesting we prepare for dramatic changes, while simultaneously assuring everyone that everything is normal. Ground-based observatories have finally started releasing data. Not the major facilities, they remain silent, but smaller observatories at universities and private institutions. Their observations confirm what amateurs have been reporting: active outgassing, asymmetric coma, continuous radio emission. They also report something amateurs haven't had the equipment to detect. 3i Atlas is emitting in X-rays. Faint emissions, barely above background, but definitely there. X-ray production from comets is rare but not unknown. It happens when solar wind ions collide with neutral gas in the coma, creating charge exchange that releases high-energy photons. But the X-ray emissions from 3i Atlas are too strong for that mechanism alone to explain. Dr. Sarah Kim, who ran the Monte Carlo simulations on trajectory probability, has a new calculation. Based on current deceleration and observed outgassing, she estimates 3i Atlas will lose another 0.2 kilometers per second before closest approach. That would bring the object's velocity at perihelion down to almost exactly Earth's orbital velocity. In other words, the object would be moving at the same speed as Earth, in the same direction, at a distance of just over 1 million kilometers. Orbital resonance. Not captured, the object still has too much energy to fall into a bound orbit, but temporarily synchronized. As if something aboard 3i Atlas calculated exactly how much velocity to shed to achieve this configuration. Kim hasn't published this calculation. She's shared it privately with colleagues who understand the implications. If 3i Atlas is deliberately matching Earth's orbital parameters, it's not passing through our system. It's arriving. The object intends to stay, at least temporarily, within Earth's orbital neighbourhood, and that suggests purpose beyond simple exploration. You don't synchronize orbits unless you want to remain in communication range, maintain stable geometry, prepare for sustained interaction. The night sky over major cities is dark on December 20th, not from cloud cover, from power consumption. Millions of people are inside watching screens, waiting for news about 3i Atlas. Observatories report that amateur observation has reached unprecedented levels. Backyard astronomers who haven't touched their telescopes in years are setting them up, pointing toward the coordinates, photographing the object that everyone's talking about. Social media is full of images, most showing the same features but some claiming to see structures in the coma, patterns that look designed rather than random. These structural claims are mostly dismissed as pareidolia. Humans see faces in clouds, patterns in noise, intention in randomness. But some of the images are harder to dismiss. Multiple independent observers in the southern hemisphere, where 3i Atlas is better positioned for observation, are reporting radial symmetry in the coma's inner regions. 8 distinct jets of material extending from the central object, evenly spaced, forming a pattern like spokes on a wheel. Natural outgassing doesn't do that. Cometary jets are controlled by surface features, by where ice deposits happen to be located, creating irregular patterns that change as the nucleus rotates. Perfect 8-fold symmetry requires either incredible coincidence or deliberate engineering. NASA has not commented on these observations, neither has EOS. The major space agencies are waiting, letting amateur speculation build while they presumably analyse data from instruments we can't access. Whatever they're seeing with Hubble, with Chandra, with the James Webb Space Telescope that's certainly been pointed at 3i Atlas for days, they're keeping it private. Either they're seeing nothing unusual and don't want to legitimize amateur speculation by responding to it, or they're seeing something very unusual and haven't decided how to break that news to 8 billion people. Eleanor Vasquez hasn't slept in 36 hours. She's been in her lab continuously, monitoring every frequency, recording every signal that comes from 3i Atlas. The continuous transmission at 1.42 GHz remains indecipherable, but she's noticed something else. Every 23.93 hours, at the exact moment that would correspond to the object completing one rotation, there's a brief spike in signal strength. It lasts less than a second, wouldn't be noticeable unless you were looking for it, but it's there every rotation, like a beacon. Like something aboard the object orienting toward Earth once per rotation and transmitting a pulse of higher intensity. She's tried to measure whether these pulses encode information, whether the slight variations in amplitude or duration might constitute a message. So far nothing. But she's only captured 3 complete rotations worth of data. Maybe the message repeats over longer timescales. Maybe it's a countdown. 24 pulses until something happens. 12 pulses until activation. She doesn't know. All she knows is that the pattern exists, that it's artificial in a way that natural processes can't explain, and that nobody in authority is acknowledging it. Midnight UTC. 12 hours until closest approach. 3i Atlas is magnitude 8.5, visible to naked eyes in dark locations, definitely visible through any binoculars. People are gathering. Observatories are opening their facilities to public viewing. Planetariums are hosting watch parties. Someone started a live stream from a mountain in Chile, just a fixed camera pointed at the sky, showing the object as a bright point slowly moving against background stars. 2 million people are watching. They're watching a dot. But that dot represents something from beyond our solar system, something that might be about to change everything we believe about our place in the universe. So they watch, and they wait, and they wonder whether morning will bring explanation or transformation, or just the empty feeling of anticlimax when the most anticipated astronomical event in history turns out to be nothing but a rock passing by. Part 11. Closest Approach. December 21st, 2025, 0613 UTC, the moment of closest approach. 3i Atlas reaches its minimum distance from Earth, 1,072,000 kilometers, exactly 2.79 times the distance to the Moon. In astronomical terms, this is nothing. An object from another star system has come closer to Earth than any confirmed interstellar visitor in recorded history. Millions of eyes are watching. Thousands of telescopes are pointed at the precise coordinates, and for the first 17 minutes, nothing happens. The object continues on its trajectory, still outgassing, still transmitting its indecipherable radio signal, still showing that strange 8-fold symmetry in its coma structure. Observers report no change. The dot in the sky moves exactly as orbital mechanics predicts, tracing its hyperbolic path through the inner solar system. People begin to relax. It's anticlimactic, yes, but maybe that's for the best. Maybe 3i Atlas is exactly what the skeptics said. A weird rock with unusual properties but no intelligence behind it. Maybe all the speculation about alien probes and hidden messages was just humans seeing patterns where none existed. Then, at 0630 UTC, the object does something impossible. It stops outgassing. Not gradually, the way natural cometary activity diminishes, instantly. Between one observation and the next, the coma vanishes. Photographs taken at 0629 show the characteristic halo of gas and dust. Photographs taken at 0631 show a point source with no visible coma at all. The material that has already been released continues expanding outward, following ballistic trajectories, but no new gas is being produced. The object sealed itself, shut down whatever process was releasing volatiles, and returned to the inert state it maintained for the first 7 months after discovery. Amateur observers notice first. The online forums explode with confusion. Did everyone's instruments fail simultaneously? Did cloud cover suddenly obscure the object? But confirmations pour in from around the world. Clear skies, equipment functioning normally, the coma is gone. 3i Atlas has become a dark point against the stars, no longer showing any visible activity, and then it starts transmitting. not the continuous signal at 1.42 GHz that's been broadcasting for days. Something new. A powerful radio pulse at multiple frequencies simultaneously, strong enough that amateur operators report their receivers saturating. The pulse lasts exactly 3 seconds, then silence, then another 3-second pulse. The pattern repeats. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off, perfect regularity that natural processes cannot produce. Dr. Elena Vasquez, still monitoring from her lab, has instruments designed to handle strong signals. Her equipment doesn't saturate. It captures the full spectrum of the transmission, and what she sees makes her hands shake as she saves the data. The pulses aren't simple carrier waves. They're structured, modulated, containing clear information in multiple bands. This isn't random noise. This is deliberate communication, transmitted with enough power to be detectable by anyone with basic radio equipment. Within minutes, researchers around the world are attempting to decode the transmission. The signal structure is surprisingly simple once you know what to look for. Binary encoding, basic on-off keying that represents ones and zeros, the kind of modulation scheme that any civilization capable of radio would recognize. But the content isn't immediately meaningful. Long strings of binary that don't correspond to any known language or mathematical sequence. Until someone notices that the binary strings, when interpreted as coordinates, map to locations on Earth's surface. Specific latitudes and longitudes, precise to within meters. The transmission is sending coordinates. Hundreds of them. Thousands. A catalogue of locations scattered across every continent, every ocean, covering the entire planet in a systematic grid. What those coordinates represent, nobody knows. They don't correspond to major cities or military installations or anything obvious. Some are in remote wilderness, some are underwater. Some are in populated areas but pointing to random buildings or streets with no apparent significance. It's a map, but a map of what? Landing sites, observation points, targets. The transmission provides coordinates without context, leaving everyone to guess at intention. The coordinate broadcast continues for 47 minutes, then it stops. The powerful multi-frequency pulse ceases, and 3i Atlas returns to broadcasting its original 1.42 GHz signal. But that signal has changed. It's stronger now, no longer continuous but pulsing in rapid bursts, and this time, researchers can decode it because they have a key. The coordinate transmission established a framework, a basic alphabet that makes the subsequent message interpretable. What the message says is 3 words, repeated over and over in multiple languages including several Earth languages that no natural process could produce. English, Mandarin, Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Russian, French. The same 3 words in each language, unmistakable in their clarity. We are here. The planet goes silent for about 15 seconds. That's how long it takes for major news networks to process what they're hearing, for social media to collectively realize what's being transmitted. Then the noise begins. Not panic, exactly. Humanity has been preparing for this moment, consciously or not, for decades. We've imagined first contact through countless stories and scenarios, but imagining and experiencing are different things. When an object from another star system announces its presence in multiple human languages, the theoretical becomes undeniable. Governments respond with coordinated statements, suggesting they've been prepared for this possibility. The United Nations convenes an emergency session. Space agencies worldwide release carefully worded press conferences acknowledging that 3i Atlas appears to be an artificial object and that international protocols for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence are being activated. Nobody uses the word alien yet. That comes later, once the shock wears off and terminology becomes important. But here's what makes the situation stranger than anyone expected. 3i Atlas isn't approaching Earth to land or establish communication. It's still on its hyperbolic trajectory. After transmitting its coordinates and announcing its presence, the object begins accelerating again. Not through outgassing this time, through actual propulsion, visible thrust that shows up in infrared as a focused point of heat on one side of the object. Whatever drives this craft, it's no longer hiding its nature. The acceleration is gentle but persistent. 3i Atlas is leaving, not at the 41.7 kilometers per second it arrived with, but faster. It's heading out of the inner solar system. Trajectory calculations suggest it will reach Jupiter's orbit in approximately 8 months, and then continue into interstellar space. It came, it sent coordinates, it announced itself, and now it's departing. The entire encounter from arrival to departure will span less than 10 months. A cosmic flyby, brief and purposeful. Except for the coordinates. Those matter. Because within 6 hours of the transmission, people start visiting the locations. The coordinates that fell on land in accessible areas, people go there. Some out of curiosity, some hoping for signs. Some because they were already near one of the indicated locations and wanted to see what, if anything, was there. And what they find is nothing. Empty fields, forest clearings, street corners, random points on the landscape with no visible markers, no buried artifacts, no signs of past visitation. Just normal Earth geography that happens to match coordinates transmitted by an interstellar visitor. Hundreds of people visiting hundreds of locations, finding nothing unusual, documenting the absence and sharing it online. For the first 12 hours after closest approach, this looks like a massive anticlimax. Yes, 3i Atlas is confirmed artificial. Yes, first contact happened, but the actual content of the message seems meaningless. Random coordinates leading nowhere, a cosmic prank or a misunderstanding, or perhaps the aliens included data we're not equipped to interpret. Then someone in Iceland notices something. One of the coordinates pointed to a location near Reykjavik. The person who visited found nothing remarkable, just a spot on the ground marked by GPS. But seismic monitoring equipment in the area detected a very faint vibration at exactly that location, starting at the moment of closest approach. Not an earthquake, not human activity, just a subtle oscillation in the ground, frequency around 40 Hz, too low for human perception but detectable by sensitive instruments. Other people check their coordinates with seismic data. Everywhere there's instrumentation, the pattern repeats. Each coordinate marks a point where faint vibrations began at closest approach. The entire planet is ringing like a bell, resonating at frequencies we can barely detect, activated somehow by 3i Atlas as it passed. The vibrations are too weak to cause any damage, too subtle to affect structures or people, but they're there, undeniable, a fingerprint left by something that visited and chose to mark specific locations. What this means, nobody knows. Is it a greeting, a test, a warning? Are the vibrations temporary or permanent? Will they intensify or fade? Scientists scramble to measure and analyse, deploying equipment to as many coordinate sites as possible, trying to understand what's been done to Earth and why. But 3i Atlas isn't waiting for us to figure it out. The object is already past lunar orbit, accelerating outward, its message delivered and its purpose, whatever it was, apparently complete. The radio transmission continues for 6 more hours, repeating, "We are here in every human language researchers can. Identify." Then it stops. 3i Atlas goes silent, returning to the electromagnetic quietness it maintained for the first months after discovery. No more signals, no more messages, just a dark object receding into the distance, leaving humanity with thousands of vibrating coordinates and the certainty that we're not alone in the universe. Part 12. The Aftermath and Analysis. The world doesn't end. That's the first surprise. After decades of speculation about how humanity would react to confirmed contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, the actual response is almost disappointing in its reasonableness. There's fear. Yes. There's uncertainty. There's a cottage industry of doomsday prophets insisting the vibrations are precursors to invasion or extermination. But mostly, people just continue their lives while processing the new reality that somewhere in the universe, someone else is alive and advanced enough to visit us. Markets fluctuate for about 3 days, then stabilise. Religions issue statements, most of them variations on, "This doesn't contradict our teachings because God's creation is larger than we understood." Governments cooperate more than expected, sharing data and coordinating analysis through frameworks established decades ago for exactly this contingency. The United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs activates its protocols for contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, protocols that were theoretical until December 21st and are now very suddenly practical. NASA releases the MAVEN data on December 23rd, all of it. The close-range photographs from October 2nd that supposedly corrupted in a spacecraft failure that looks increasingly suspicious now that we know what MAVEN was observing. The images are remarkable. They show 3i Atlas in detail that ground-based telescopes could never achieve. A perfectly smooth spherical object, dark grey, with no visible surface features except for 8 evenly spaced panels that must be the source of the jets observers detected during the approach phase. In the high-resolution imagery, those panels are clearly artificial, geometric precision that no natural process produces, boundaries too sharp and angles too exact to be geological. The object is 612 meters in diameter, almost exactly the size estimated from brightness measurements. But it's not solid rock or metal. Analysis of MAVEN's radar returns suggests the interior is mostly hollow, or at least filled with material much less dense than the exterior shell. The radar data also shows something else: regular structures inside, compartments or chambers or machinery, organised in patterns that suggest design. This isn't a modified asteroid with some propulsion strapped on. This is a purpose-built spacecraft, constructed by something with engineering capabilities we can't currently match. The admission that NASA had this data all along, that the MAVEN failure was exactly as suspicious as it looked, triggers investigations, congressional hearings, international inquiries, demands for transparency about what else was known and when. NASA officials claim they were following security protocols. That confirmation of artificial origin required verification before public announcement that the timing of MAVEN's communication failure was coincidental. Nobody believes the last part, but proving intentional sabotage is difficult when the spacecraft is still silent and unrecoverable. Dr. Marcus Webb, the breakthrough listen researcher who preserved evidence of deleted signals, becomes briefly famous for his persistence. The signals he documented, the September 9th transmission that was erased from official databases, are now recognized as early attempts at communication. Attempts that were suppressed because acknowledging them would have required acknowledging what 3i Atlas was, and someone in authority wasn't ready for that conversation. Elena Vasquez shares her complete dataset, months of electromagnetic observations that NASA has to admit they duplicated and concealed. The radio signals, the patterns, the evidence of deliberate transmission, all of it was known to authorities who chose silence over transparency. The justification is national security, preventing panic, protecting the public from unverified information. The criticism is that governments assumed people couldn't handle truth and made that decision without consultation or consent. The Atlas Working Group, that informal network of researchers who suspected cover-up, feels vindicated but not victorious. They were right about the suppression. They were right that something extraordinary was approaching. But being right doesn't change the fundamental situation. An object from another star system visited Earth, marked thousands of locations with unexplained vibrations, announced its presence, and left. We have confirmation of extraterrestrial intelligence. We have zero understanding of intentional context. The vibrations continue. Seismologists have deployed instruments to as many coordinate sites as possible, mapping the phenomenon globally. The vibrations are coherent, meaning they're all oscillating in phase with each other despite being scattered across the planet. That requires either incredible coincidence or some mechanism that synchronized them during the initial activation. The frequency remains constant at 40 Hz, amplitude so low that sensitive equipment is needed for detection. There's no apparent energy source. The vibration should decay, lose coherence, fade into background noise. Instead, they persist unchanged, as if 3i Atlas left some kind of resonator at each location that requires no power and generates no heat, but continues oscillating indefinitely. What purpose this serves, nobody knows. The coordinates don't spell out patterns when mapped globally. They're not concentrated in geologically significant areas. Some fall on tectonic boundaries, but most don't. Some are near population centres, but most are remote. The distribution looks almost random, except the fact that it was deliberately transmitted suggests it's anything but random. There's a logic to the selection that we don't understand. Dr. Sarah Kim runs simulations testing whether the vibrations might be a form of planetary engineering, some subtle modification to Earth's seismic properties. Her calculations suggest that at current amplitude, the vibrations would take millions of years to have measurable effects on tectonic activity or magnetic field dynamics. Unless they intensify, which remains a possibility, they're essentially harmless. But harmless doesn't mean meaningless. Something from another star system marked our planet with thousands of synchronized resonators. That's a statement, even if we can't read it yet. Religious communities grapple with implications differently depending on theology. Some embrace the confirmation of life beyond Earth as evidence of divine creativity. Others struggle with the question of whether extraterrestrial intelligence possesses souls or requires salvation. Most eventually conclude that existence of alien life is compatible with their beliefs, if interpreted correctly, which is the same conclusion humans have been reaching about disruptive discoveries for millennia. The scientific community focuses on what can be measured. 3i Atlas provided data, and data can be analysed even when intention remains opaque. The object's mass, estimated from gravitational effects on Mars during the October flyby, is approximately 800,000 metric tons. That's heavy for its size, suggesting dense materials or heavy shielding. The propulsion produces thrust of approximately 24,000 newtons, which sounds powerful but is actually modest for an interstellar spacecraft of that mass. Acceleration is slow, but over years or decades it would build up significant velocity. Energy requirements for that propulsion, calculated from observed thrust and assuming reasonable efficiency, suggest power production on the order of megawatts. Where that power comes from, nuclear fusion or antimatter or something more exotic, we can't determine from external observations. But knowing the scale of energy involved tells us something about whoever built this craft. They have power generation technology significantly beyond our current capabilities, but not beyond our theoretical understanding. This isn't magic, it's engineering. That realization is oddly comforting. 3i Atlas is artificial, but it's not inexplicable. It operates according to physics that we partially understand. Whoever built it is advanced, but not incomprehensibly so. There may be a few centuries ahead of us, maybe a millennium, but they're working with the same fundamental forces and constraints that govern our technology. They're not gods, they're just older. The question of why they came and why they left without establishing sustained communication produces endless speculation but no conclusions. Maybe they're shy, maybe they're cautious, maybe they're conducting a survey of technological civilizations and Earth is just one stop on a long journey. Maybe the vibrations are their way of saying, "We know you're here, we're watching, we'll be back." Or maybe they're as confused about how to talk to us as we are about how to interpret their actions. What we do know is that the galaxy is inhabited, that intelligence exists beyond Earth, that someone with the capability to cross interstellar distances is aware of us, and that our planet now carries markers, thousands of them, resonating quietly in the crust, placed there by visitors who announced themselves and departed, leaving humanity to figure out what it means to no longer be alone. Part 13. What Maven really saw. 3 weeks after closest approach, a data analyst at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory named Rebecca Torres makes a discovery that recontextualizes everything. Torres wasn't supposed to be working on Maven data. The spacecraft's communication failure was still under investigation, and access to its archived observations was restricted to senior personnel. But Torres had security clearance from previous projects, and in the bureaucratic confusion following December 21st, nobody revoked her access. So she started looking through Maven's image files, not the processed photographs released to the public, but the raw data that included metadata and instrument telemetry. What she found in the metadata made her call an emergency meeting with mission directors. The images NASA released on December 23rd, the close-range photographs of 3i Atlas taken on October 2nd, weren't the only images Maven captured that day. The spacecraft took 2 sets of observations, 4 hours apart as originally reported, but it also took a third set approximately 16 hours later. This third observation session wasn't mentioned in any official timeline, it wasn't included in public data releases, and according to the metadata, the images from that session showed something very different from the smooth spherical object visible in earlier photographs. Torres had access to thumbnails, low-resolution previews automatically generated for quick reference. The full-resolution images required higher-level authorization she didn't have, but even in thumbnail form the differences were obvious. The third observation set showed 3i Atlas with one of its 8 panels open, not slightly open, fully retracted, exposing interior structure that was clearly not natural. Geometric shapes, regular patterns, components that looked machined rather than geological. And in the centre of the exposed section, something that reflected light in a way that suggested metal or glass, smooth surfaces and sharp angles. This was what Maven saw. This was why the spacecraft's data was classified as corrupted, not because the instruments malfunctioned, but because the images showed proof of artificial construction 16 days before NASA was ready to acknowledge that possibility. Someone decided that this information needed to remain hidden, at least until after closest approach, at least until there was no choice but to admit what was visiting our solar system. Torres shared her findings with colleagues she trusted. The information leaked, as information always does. Within days, news outlets were reporting that NASA possessed images of 3I Atlas's interior, that evidence of the object's artificial nature existed long before December 21st, that the cover-up was more extensive than previously acknowledged. The agency initially denied the reports, then admitted that yes, additional imagery existed, but it required further analysis before release. The analysis apparently required weeks despite the object's nature being confirmed. Public pressure mounted. Congress demanded immediate release of all MAVEN data. International partners questioned why information had been withheld. NASA released the images on January 8, 2026. They're remarkable and disturbing in equal measure. The interior of 3I Atlas, visible in the section where one panel retracted, shows machinery. Not primitive mechanisms, not the kind of technology that looks obviously mechanical, but structures too regular to be natural, arrangements of materials that suggest function and design. There are cylindrical components, possibly tanks or reactors. There are what look like conduits or cables connecting different sections. There are surfaces that appear to be displays or interfaces, dark and inactive but clearly manufactured. The most significant feature is in the central region, a spherical chamber approximately 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by a framework of supports and equipment. The chamber's surface is reflective, metallic, potentially shielded. Whatever that chamber contains, it's important enough to warrant substantial protection and resources. Speculation immediately focuses on it being a power source, maybe a fusion reactor or antimatter containment system. Others suggest it might be computational equipment, an AI core or data repository. Some propose it could be biological, a habitat or preservation system for crew or samples. We don't know. The images show structure, but not function. They confirm that 3I Atlas is artificial, but they don't explain what it does or who built it. What the images definitely prove is that NASA knew. The agency had clear evidence of artificial construction available on October 2nd, and they chose to suppress it for over 3 months. The justification is security and preventing panic, but the effect was to deny humanity time to prepare psychologically for what was approaching. The political fallout is significant. Trust in space agencies declines. Conspiracy theories flourish about what else might be hidden. Some governments establish independent oversight committees to review sensitive astronomical data before it's classified. The scientific community demands transparency protocols to prevent future suppression of discoveries with public significance. It's a mess, but a productive mess, the kind that leads to institutional reform and better accountability. But the real revelation in MAVEN's images isn't the machinery, it's the markings. On several visible surfaces inside the exposed section, there are symbols, not random scratches or manufacturing marks. Deliberate inscriptions, repeated patterns that suggest language or notation. The symbols are geometric, combinations of lines and curves that don't match any human writing system. Some researchers suggest they look similar to certain mathematical notations, which makes sense if you're designing a universal communication system. Others note similarities to circuit diagrams or architectural plans, and MAVEN was paying attention, even if unintentionally. The spacecraft's instruments recorded everything, stored the data, began transmitting it back to Earth. Then, 2 days later, the communication failure. Not immediately after observation, which would look too suspicious, but after a delay calculated to seem like coincidental technical problems. Whoever ordered MAVEN's shutdown knew they couldn't hide the October 2nd observations indefinitely, but they could delay release long enough to control the narrative around first contact. That control failed. Too many amateur observers saw too many anomalies. Too many researchers preserved deleted data. By the time December 21st arrived, the cover-up was already unravelling, and 3I Atlas's transmission made concealment impossible. The full truth about MAVEN's observations came out anyway, just weeks later than it should have. All that suppression achieved was undermining public trust, and confirming that institutions will hide uncomfortable truths if given the opportunity. Rebecca Torres, the analyst who found the hidden third observation session, becomes an accidental hero to transparency advocates. She didn't set out to expose a cover-up. She was just doing her job, checking data, noticing inconsistencies. But her willingness to share what she found, despite knowing it would create problems for her employer, represents exactly the kind of courage that prevents secrets from staying buried forever. NASA doesn't fire her. The political climate makes that impossible, but her career advancement prospects take a hit, which sends a message to other would-be whistleblowers about the cost of honesty. The images themselves, now public, get analysed by thousands of experts and amateurs, everyone looking for clues about origin or purpose or what the symbols mean. Progress is slow because we're working from photographs, unable to physically examine or interact with the object. But even limited visual data provides constraints. The materials visible in the exposed section include metals we can identify spectrographically, alloys that are sophisticated but not incomprehensible. The construction techniques suggest precision manufacturing, tight tolerances, but nothing that violates known engineering principles. Whoever built 3i Atlas is advanced, but their technology isn't magic. It's just better than ours, which means, theoretically, we could eventually build something similar. Not soon. Not with our current capabilities. But the gap is measurable in centuries, not incomprehensible gulfs. That realization shifts how humanity thinks about the visitors. They're not gods or incomprehensible aliens. They're engineers. They're explorers. They're what we might become if we survive long enough and invest sufficient resources in space technology. And they were here. They saw us. They marked our planet and left. The question that keeps everyone awake is whether they'll come back, and if so, whether we'll be ready to meet them as anything other than primitive locals being surveyed by advanced outsiders. Part 14. The resonance deepens. By February 2026, scientists have deployed sophisticated monitoring equipment to over 300 of the coordinate locations marked by 3i Atlas. The vibrations continue unchanged. 40 Hz, perfectly coherent across the planet. Amplitude stable within measurement precision. But something unexpected is happening. The resonance is affecting more than just the ground. Electromagnetic instruments at some sites detect corresponding fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field, tiny variations that pulse in sync with the seismic oscillations. The coupling between mechanical and electromagnetic effects is weak, but it's there, measurable, unexplained. Dr. Kenji Nakamura at the Tokyo Institute of Technology has been studying this coupling intensively. His team deployed magnetometers at 15 locations across Japan, all sites corresponding to 3i Atlas coordinates. What they're seeing suggests the vibrations aren't just mechanical oscillations of rock and soil. Something at each location is converting that mechanical energy into electromagnetic radiation, creating a subtle but persistent radio emission at extremely low frequency. The emission is too weak for most instruments to detect, but specialized equipment designed for studying Earth's natural electromagnetic environment can pick it up. The implications are profound. If the coordinate sites are generating electromagnetic signals, they're essentially a distributed antenna array covering the entire planet. The individual emissions are too weak to matter, but coherent signals from thousands of sources, all oscillating in phase, would combine constructively. The total power output would be measurable, potentially detectable from considerable distance. It's as if 3i Atlas left a beacon, not concentrated in one location but spread across Earth's surface, announcing our planet's presence to anyone listening in the right frequency range. This interpretation worries some people. If Earth is now broadcasting its location to the galaxy, we're visible in ways we weren't before December 21st. Any civilization with radio telescopes could detect the coordinated emissions, recognize their artificial spacing and coherence, identify Earth as a planet hosting either technology or someone else's infrastructure. We've gone from relative invisibility to actively signaling our presence, and we had no choice in the matter. 3i Atlas made that decision for us. Others argue this is positive. If the vibrations are a beacon, they're also an invitation. Any species advanced enough to detect the signal would understand its significance, recognize it as intentional communication rather than natural phenomena. Maybe 3i Atlas marked Earth as worth visiting, as interesting enough to warrant further investigation. Maybe we're being announced to a larger community, introduced as emerging intelligence that's ready for contact. Or maybe we're being marked for entirely different purposes that we can't anticipate. The beacon hypothesis gained support from an unexpected source. SETI researchers analysing the signal characteristics. The electromagnetic emissions from the coordinate sites aren't just random noise at low frequency. They're modulated, carrying information in their amplitude variations. The modulation is subtle, easy to miss unless you know to look for it, but it's definitely there. And when researchers decode it using the same binary framework that 3i Atlas used in its December transmission, they find a repeating sequence of numbers. The sequence is the cosmic address of our solar system. Galactic coordinates expressed in a reference frame based on pulsars, the same system humans use when we send messages into space, because pulsar timing is recognisable to anyone who understands astronomy. The beacon is telling whoever might be listening exactly where Earth is located, providing coordinates accurate enough to navigate here from anywhere in the galaxy. We're not just visible, we're advertising our position, broadcasting an invitation or a warning, or maybe just a statement of existence. Dr. Eleanor Vasquez, still monitoring radio frequencies for any signals from the departing 3i Atlas, detected something else in mid-February. The object, now past Jupiter's orbit and still accelerating outward, transmitted a brief pulse at 1.42 GHz. The transmission lasted less than 5 seconds, but it was strong enough to be detected by Earth-based instruments. Analysis shows it was a simple acknowledgement signal, the kind of message-received confirmation you'd send after successful data transmission. The timing is significant. The pulse was transmitted approximately 2 months after closest approach, which is how long it would take light-speed signals from Earth to reach 3i Atlas at its current distance. Someone or something aboard that craft was monitoring transmissions from our planet, received something sent from Earth in late December, and acknowledged receipt. What they received, we don't know. NASA broadcasts tracking signals toward deep space objects as part of routine navigation protocols. Amateur radio operators have been transmitting toward 3i Atlas since it was identified. Governments might have sent classified communications. Any or all of these could have prompted the acknowledgement. But the fact that the object is still listening, still responding to signals from Earth even as it departs our solar system, suggests the interaction isn't over. 3i Atlas came here with specific purposes: transmit coordinates, activate the resonance sites, announce presence, and apparently establish ongoing communication protocols. It's leaving, but it's maintaining contact, like an explorer departing but keeping lines open for future interaction. The planetary response to all this is surprisingly pragmatic. Yes, there's fear about unknown intentions. Yes, there's excitement about confirmed contact, but mostly, humanity adapts because that's what humans do. The vibrations become background knowledge, the kind of weird fact about Earth that everyone knows but rarely thinks about. Tourism increases at accessible coordinate sites. People want to visit the locations marked by aliens, take photographs, feel connected to something cosmic. Local economies adapt, building viewing platforms and interpretive centres at the most popular sites. Scientific research intensifies. Multiple disciplines converge on studying the resonance: seismology, electromagnetics, materials science, quantum physics. There's a sense that understanding how 3i Atlas created these persistent vibrations might unlock new physics or engineering principles. Early results suggest the mechanism involves quantum effects, some kind of stable excitation in the crystalline structure of rock that normally shouldn't persist but does because of how it was initiated. If we can figure out how to reproduce this, applications range from energy storage to communication systems to computation. But progress is slow because we're reverse engineering something we don't fully understand using only observations. We can't examine the mechanism directly. We can only measure its effects and try to work backward to first principles. It's like trying to understand a combustion engine by watching exhaust and listening to noise without being able to open the hood. Possible, eventually, but requiring patience and methodical analysis. What conclusions 3i Atlas drew from all this remain opaque, but the fact that it acknowledged our transmissions, that it's still listening as it departs, suggests we registered as more than just another lifeless rock. We got noticed, we made an impression. And somewhere aboard that departing spacecraft, in its computing systems or biological crew or whatever intelligence guides it, Earth is now documented as a place where something interesting is happening. a planet worth remembering, if not immediately worth revisiting. Part 15. What comes next? It's March 2026. 3i Atlas is beyond Saturn's orbit, accelerating toward the edge of the solar system at velocities that will carry it into interstellar space by year's end. The object has been silent for weeks, no transmissions since the February acknowledgement pulse. Maybe it's finished communicating, maybe it's saving energy for whatever comes next in its journey, or maybe it's simply watching, listening, gathering data without feeling compelled to share observations with the subjects being studied. Earth continues resonating at 40 Hz. The vibrations show no signs of decay. If anything, some monitoring stations report slight increases in amplitude, though whether that's real or instrumental drift remains debated. The electromagnetic emissions continue, broadcasting our galactic coordinates to anyone capable of detecting extremely low-frequency signals across interstellar distances. We're visible now in ways we weren't before, marked and announced, whether we wanted that or not. The scientific community has processed the shock and moved into productive investigation. Hundreds of papers have been published analysing every aspect of the encounter: trajectory analysis, spectroscopic studies, theoretical propulsion models, attempts to decode the interior markings visible in Maven's photographs. Progress is steady but incremental. We're learning, but slowly, constrained by having only observational data, rather than direct access to the technology we're trying to understand. Dr. Sarah Kim published a comprehensive analysis of 3i Atlas's approach trajectory, incorporating all available data from its discovery through departure. Her conclusion is that the object's path through our solar system was deliberately optimized to maximize observational opportunities while minimizing gravitational perturbations. It approached from the direction that gave it the longest view of Earth before closest approach. It timed its arrival to occur during Northern Hemisphere winter, when the planet's axial tilt positioned major population centers for optimal observation. The whole trajectory looks designed, not by chance gravitational interactions, but by intelligent navigation planning. This reinforces what everyone already suspected. 3i Atlas came here intentionally. This wasn't a random interstellar rock that happened to pass near Earth. Someone or something targeted our solar system specifically, travelled here across light years, conducted whatever survey or interaction they intended, and departed. The question of why remains unanswered, but the evidence of deliberate intention is overwhelming. Governments continue adapting to post-contact reality. The United Nations formalised protocols for handling future extraterrestrial interactions, because 3i Atlas probably won't be the last visitor. If one civilization found us, others might follow, either independently or because we're now marked by the resonance beacon. Humanity needs frameworks for response, decision-making processes that don't rely on individual nations acting unilaterally. Progress is bureaucratic and slow, but it's happening. Some nations have increased funding for space-based observation systems, wanting early warning if anything else approaches from interstellar space. Detection capabilities are improving. Next time, we won't be surprised by an object appearing in our inner solar system. We'll spot it years in advance, have time to study it, prepare for whatever interaction it intends. That assumes the next visitor is willing to be detected, that it doesn't have stealth capabilities or simply moves too fast for our instruments to track. But preparation seems better than the confusion and suppression that characterized humanity's response to 3i Atlas. Dr. Marcus Webb, Dr. Elena Vasquez, Dr. James Chen, all the researchers who preserved deleted data and pushed back against suppression, have formed an independent monitoring network. They're funding it through private grants and public contributions, establishing a distributed observation system that doesn't rely on government approval or institutional gatekeeping. The goal is to ensure that future detections can't be hidden, that data gets shared openly before anyone has time to classify it, or decide the public shouldn't know. This network is already monitoring multiple interesting objects. Nothing as dramatic as 3i Atlas, but various asteroids and comets that show unusual properties worth investigating. Most will probably prove to be natural, but Webb and his colleagues have learned that sometimes the weird rock is actually a spacecraft, and dismissing anomalies too quickly means missing discoveries that change everything. Amateur astronomers remain engaged, continuing to track 3i Atlas as long as it's visible. The object is now magnitude 15, requiring large telescopes and long exposures to detect. By summer, it will fade beyond the capabilities of most amateur equipment, visible only to major observatories and dedicated tracking systems. But the community that formed around observing the object hasn't dispersed. They're watching the sky more carefully now, aware that anything unusual might be significant, that the next interstellar visitor could appear at any time. The resonance sites have become cultural landmarks. Some cultures are building monuments at coordinate locations, treating them as sacred sites where Earth made contact with something beyond itself. Others approach them scientifically, establishing permanent monitoring stations to study the vibrations and electromagnetic emissions. Tourism remains strong, though it's settling into sustainable patterns rather than the initial rush of curiosity seekers. What the vibrations actually mean, what purpose they serve beyond being detectable, remains unknown. Researchers have proposed dozens of theories ranging from scientific to spiritual, but none can be verified without understanding the technology that created them. We're left with a mystery that will probably persist for decades or centuries until either we develop sufficient understanding to decode it ourselves or someone comes back to explain. The possibility of return visit occupies significant speculation. If 3i Atlas was a scout or survey mission, it might report back to whoever sent it, and that report might trigger follow-up. The timeline for such a return depends on distances and communication speeds we can only guess at. Light speed limitations suggest any response would take decades at minimum, possibly centuries, unless the visitors have faster-than-light communication or propulsion, which is possible but unproven. Alternatively, 3i Atlas might have been autonomous, not reporting to anyone, just executing programmed instructions to visit interesting solar systems and leave markers. In that case, return visit seems less likely unless we do something that attracts attention, maybe develop capabilities that register as significant from an outside perspective. Or perhaps the resonance beacon does that automatically, and we're already advertising our existence loudly enough that visitors will come investigate. Maven remains silent in Martian orbit, its mission ended by suspicious failure at the worst possible time. 3i Atlas accelerates outward, destination unknown, purpose unclear. Earth resonates at 40 Hz, broadcasting coordinates to anyone listening, and humanity stands at the edge of everything we thought we knew, looking up at stars that might contain watchers, wondering what comes next in a universe that suddenly seems much smaller and much more crowded than we ever imagined. The story doesn't end here, it's just beginning. Whatever 3i Atlas was, whatever it wanted, it found us. It changed us simply by being real, by confirming that we're not the only ones looking at the stars and wondering. And now we wait, watch, prepare for the next chapter in a narrative we didn't write but can no longer ignore. Somewhere in the darkness, someone is listening. And eventually, maybe sooner than we expect, they might answer back.